My name is Joanne Ooi. I'm the CEO of Clean Air Network, which is Hong Kong's leading clean air NGO, educating and mobilizing the public about the health impacts of air pollution. That sounded like a canned, boring commercial. Do you want me not to talk like that?
Yeah, the more relaxed and normal, better.
Do you want me to do it again?
No, it's okay.
Okay,
Just
cool.
from now on, if you
Can lighten up.
lighten up, just conversational.
Okay,
with me would
okay.
be great.
All right.
And why do you do what you do?
Because Hong Kong's air is actually, it's killing 3 people a day, but it's something that people don't know much about. So I thought that by setting up an NGO, which would educate people primarily about health, this is actually one of the best ways to activate your average person on the street. And to date, that hadn't been done in Hong Kong. So that's how we set up Clean Air Network.
Wow. And how long have you been in this clean air initiative?
I've only been doing it for about 9 months.
9 months.
Yeah.
And did it? What got you into it? Like, did it hit a critical threshold where the air was so bad and?
Well, the government announced in the summer of last year that it intended to tighten Hong Kong's air quality policy for the first time in a really long time, more than 20 years. So me and a bunch of other people realized that this could be a very unusual window of opportunity, and that if there was going to be one time to act in the history of Hong Kong, it would be now. So these 2 years, these 2 or 3 years are going to be a very important time for Hong Kong's air.
Now, why is the air quality issue in Hong Kong so important?
Well, actually, Hong Kong's air pollution is its biggest public health crisis. It's actually at an emergency epidemic level. It literally kills 3 people every day. And if you compare it to an infectious disease epidemic like SARS, in fact, SARS only killed, I don't want to say only killed, but SARS took 300 lives, 299 to be exact. And if you compare it to swine flu, for example, swine flu has killed less than 100 people, and yet air pollution, which kills more than 1,000 people a year, is not being taken as seriously as these health epidemics.
Yeah.
So I mean, it is literally Hong Kong's biggest public health problem.
And do you think it's a sort of symbol of larger issues? Like when I think of air pollution, I don't really think of larger environmental problems. I just think of lots of cars ripping around. Is the air pollution issue here sort of a bigger underlying issue?
Well, I think that air pollution is a symptom of how our political system is dysfunctional, that it's not representative of what the majority of people in Hong Kong actually want. And that's actually one of the reasons that the government until now has failed to actually take decisive action. So what we're doing is also, I hope, using air pollution as a kind of weather vane topic about which there is unanimous agreement in society, as a way to actually motivate people to become civically involved. And to engender a sense of responsibility, and to inspire people that they have a duty, a crucial duty towards each other and towards the place where they live. In this case, to the environment, but also generally, that there's a lot that an individual can do in society to improve the lot of themselves and their families and where they live.
In terms of the biggest environmental issues facing Hong Kong, what do you think they are?
Air pollution is without a doubt the biggest issue facing Hong Kong, but I mean, in general, and I'm going to go back to the problems of the political system, I mean, this is a place which is going to have difficulty coordinating many interests in order to procure public goods such as urban greening, clean air, I mean, maybe even consumer safety. I mean, this is a place where constituency-driven business interests tend to rule the day, and the outcomes, the political outcomes, tend to reflect that. So when collective action, which requires some vision and leadership, is required, sometimes the political system has trouble delivering that, because, I mean, we're in this weird area between China and a system like what we have in Congress, where we don't have the authoritarian leadership of the Chinese government, but at the same time, we don't have the same level of representation in a democratic institution, in a legislature such as Congress. So we end up in this kind of no man's zone where there's a gray area and legislation is inevitably compromised, and it's a result of infighting and factionalism between legislators who represent not the people, but business constituencies. Because I don't know if you know that about Hong Kong. I mean, its legislature is, half of the legislature is not elected. These are appointed, half of the legislators are appointed and represent specific industries in society, such as the real estate sector, such as the medical profession, such as the transport industry. So, I mean, of course, this is not going to be reflective of what the majority of Hong Kong people want.
Right. How do you think a problem like that can be turned around?
I think that this is early days for what NGOs can accomplish. I mean, we need to educate society at a very deep and widespread level through grassroots education, especially of children. I actually think that children can be a fulcrum of education and mobilization throughout society because of their ability to influence their parents. And of course, they represent the newest generation. And it's very important for them to develop an appreciation for environmental values. And that's something that is very new in Chinese culture generally, that the environment is something which should be an important priority in social policy and in governance.
What do you think Hong Kong is going to look like in 50 years?
I think that in 50 years, actually, Hong Kong is going to be quite a nice place. I mean, because really, if you take how seriously the environment is being blighted all over China, including Hong Kong, there is no doubt that efficient economic mechanisms are going to address a lot of the negative externalities which are resulting from a lack of political rectification. That was a terrible way to put that, but I think that a lot of this is going to be addressed in the next 50 years. But of course, in the meantime, thousands and thousands of people are going to die from the environmental degradation. So of course, we're trying to accelerate this process.
Yeah. Now, in terms of the next 50 years, there's big environmental issues underlying the clean air issue. You know, the destruction of the environment, deforestation, the burning of coal and fossil fuels. What role do you think Hong Kong and China has in turning that around?
I think that China especially has a pivotal role, obviously, in its consumption of fossil fuels, now being the largest emitter of carbon dioxide in the world. A recent article in the New York Times showed that the increase in per capita consumption, despite gains in energy efficiency, is going to be by far nullify any efficiency gains. I think that although it's laudable that China has these really aggressive targets to improve its energy efficiency, it has to continue to take a very aggressive leadership role, and that it's going to be a huge challenge. But China itself represents a tipping point in terms of global environmental catastrophe. So that's something that we cannot underplay. Now, Hong Kong, in relationship to China, has for a very long time always been considered the leading edge of what is going to be, the development of the Chinese economy, culture, society. Right now, unfortunately, it's failing in that capacity to function as a beacon of leadership in the environment. So really, Hong Kong has an opportunity, and with it, the Pearl River Delta, to lead the rest of China towards a greener future. And that's the kind of lesson we're trying to instill in the public right now. That we would like to turn what is right now a disappointment into more of an opportunity for the Hong Kong government.
Now, did you have any kids?
I have an 11-year-old son.
And are you worried at all about what the future looks like for him?
I mean, one reason I got into environmentalism is because my 11-year-old son had a chronic cough, which would last for months and months and months. And this is another scathing indictment of the air quality in Hong Kong. It is something that is called frequently among residents the Hong Kong cough, because it's so widespread. And in fact, we recently conducted a survey through 10 pediatricians' offices throughout Hong Kong, where more than 30% of the parents who were visiting the clinics, and not for respiratory problems, reported that their children had chronic coughs throughout the year. I mean, about 80 to 90% of the children had a cough, but 30 to 40% of them actually had a chronic cough. And it was only in retrospect that I realized that my son is suffering from what is a very typical ailment caused by Hong Kong's air. So that has been a major motivation in me getting involved in this movement.
Wow. And in terms of what kind of change we need for the future, you know, our film's talking about the fact that these environmental issues are, you know, they're going to start threatening human survival. And it seems like the air quality issue is the beginning of that. You know, like we're polluting the world we live in, and it's starting to kill people.
I think that air pollution is literally one of the air pollution and water pollution are the two most comprehensible, everyday, understandable forms of environmental degradation that people can actually latch onto easily and understand. Because, like the example of my son, you know, every day, one reason I got involved in this, I come home with a headache and feeling a little bit dizzy. That was happening to me, and I think it's quite commonplace, actually. I mean, and that's something that can function as the thin end of the wedge in terms of implanting a greater sense of awareness in society at large about the importance of the environment. Because unlike climate change, which is consequences which are more diffuse and difficult to understand, air pollution is something that's directly hitting our health where we feel it every day.
Yeah. I'm just going to check a couple things. Speaking of air pollution, I went on a motorcycle ride, ripping around through all the tunnels and stuff.
Oh my God.
And the next day I woke up with an eye infection.
Okay, see, yeah, that's...
And had this eye thing going on.
Yeah.
And I'm starting to wonder whether that had...
Oh, yeah. Oh my God. If you were like, you know, no, the roadside pollution here is, I mean, one of the facts that I didn't mention, our air is 3 times dirtier than New York City's. It's almost 3 times dirtier than London's air. I mean, these are places which we consider to be very dirty, very urbanized, and I mean, that's a bleak comparison.
Yeah. And is that simply mostly because of all the motorists?
It's mostly because of buses and trucks, and old buses and trucks burn diesel in a very inefficient way, and there's a huge amount of particulate matter and nitrogen dioxide, and that is actually the primary contributor to the part of air pollution which is the public health problem. Because although a lot of pollution does come from China, you'll notice that there's a big haze, for example, hanging over Hong Kong's harbor, which prevents you from being able to see the skyline on the other side of the harbor. That actually is predominantly from China. But in terms of what is actually affecting you when you were saying you are on your motorcycle ride, the major public health problem is the age of our commercial vehicle fleet, where these pre-Euro trucks and buses are emitting 34 times the amount of NOx and particulates than a newer Euro 4 vehicle. So that's actually this is a major cleanup issue for Hong Kong, but luckily it's actually a form of low-hanging fruit.
Yeah, something that can be...
Yeah, that the Hong Kong government could actually do something about.
Now, if we don't turn this around, what does the future look like for Hong Kong?
The future's looking pretty, it's actually going to be quite, if you think about how many people are suffering from air pollution health-wise, it's pretty grim. In terms of expats and others leaving Hong Kong, when we conducted this survey of parents, this was actually not expat parents, this was primarily local Chinese parents. More than 50% of them had actually contemplated moving out of Hong Kong to save their children's health. So I think that this is an issue which, whenever a parent especially recognizes that bad air pollution can actually impair permanently their child's health in a way which is going to reduce their lifetime health, this is a serious cause for moving out of Hong Kong. So I think that that's one of the things we're confronting. I also think that because China is cleaning up all of its environmental problems at a much quicker pace and with a much and much more aggressively than Hong Kong. I mean, Shanghai and Singapore are already competing for the attention of the business community. So Singapore is systematically rated #1 compared to Hong Kong, and while Hong Kong continues to struggle with its air pollution. So I think that as a vaunted business destination, which has touted itself always as the most efficient place to do business in the world, I think that Hong Kong's standing in the world is also going to take a beating in the next 5 to 10 years if it doesn't do something about its air pollution.
Now, as a symbol or as a metaphor, do you think we can use the air quality issues here to, leverage massive change? Because we need, we in my opinion, we need to clean up the air, but we also need some serious, change to government, serious change.
Yeah. No, we have to use, I'm really thinking of air pollution as the opening salvo of what needs to be a much broader grassroots movement, which is based on sustainable values. And air pollution is just the first chapter of that. That's what we really hope, because as you're saying, I mean, we need to engineer widespread, profound change about factoring in the negative externalities. I hate to keep on using that term, but the costs which are currently not reflected in the price of everything that we consume. I mean, this is getting sidetracked on that. But yes, anyway, yes, air pollution can definitely be the first, can be the opening move in a much longer chess game where we convince governments that they can no longer afford to ignore issues about which the public is feeling very passionately. But this is a movement which is going to take 5 to 10 years to really gain momentum, and then at the end of that, or as the culmination, it'll just be taken for granted that, for example, a political candidate's viability is going to be very much judged by what are his environmental values. That's another thing that we're trying to change. We're trying to get the media and the press to introduce this as a topic of vetting a candidate in the legislature or in a district councilor's program. So this is at the level of very much grassroots education, and that's going to be that's a long road, but we've started down it very aggressively already.
In its sort of simply put, what kind of changes are necessary to get out of this?
I think that people have to stop thinking about the environment as an environmental problem. In the case of air pollution, I would say that we need to convert this into an issue that people can relate to immediately. So my greatest challenge is to convert air pollution into a public health issue. Once you convert it into a health issue, then everybody kind of wakes up and takes notice for the first time that, hey, this isn't an environmental issue for people who wear Birkenstocks and tie-dye t-shirts. This is something which is going to affect Hong Kong's competitiveness and which is going to affect my kids' lifetime of health. Once we can manage to send that message effectively, we will have gone a long way to doing this job.
And do you think the change is going to be led by the people? Is the change going to be led by the government? Like, what's the most effective silver bullet to try to combat this?
We conduct what I call a 360-degree mobilization campaign, where each component, I mean, this sounds trite, is indispensable. So it's everything from talking to primary school students, which we are really beginning to do now, to talking to business leaders who have the ear of the chief executive of Hong Kong, who go and say to him, look, this is something which is impairing the health of Hong Kong as a city. We need to have pressure points and touch points in all sectors and at all levels of society, because with a job as momentous as this one, we can never do enough. So the pressure has to come from every direction.
If there were one thing you'd want to tell 500 million people about our global environmental crisis, what would you tell them?
Oh God, no one's ever asked me that question. If you can believe it or not. I would say that the environment is very much about civic engagement and a sense of civic responsibility. And I think that, in fact, and I try to use my own life as a leading example of this philosophy, that you have to believe, and it's true, that each individual can make a difference. And once you have this sense of purpose, This is actually, it's this level of activation at the individual level, the sense of individual responsibility, which has been lacking, not just, like your average person on the street, but this percolates down and up to many different levels. I mean, me as a civic leader, environmental leader, but also the CEO who decides for the first time to exercise individual responsibility in his job and to, in that case, maybe single-handedly decide on a more environmental agenda or set of values for his company. It's at that level that you have to believe that you can make a difference.
Now,
I was trying to say that in a simple. I can't say anything short. That's my problem.
That's okay. Now, why is it important for the public to be on board with this?
What do you mean? You mean on board with this?
In terms of having responsibility and feeling like they're engaged. Why is it important?
No, because we need to actually, we need to increase the signal to noise ratio and make the environment a higher priority. It's only when, each voice is going to contribute to the amplification of this message. And we need to reach a tipping point by educating enough people that they believe that this is jeopardizing their future and the sustainability of the planet. Now, I say sustainability of the planet in a place like Hong Kong or China. This value, the idea of sustainability of the planet is just totally irrelevant to the average Chinese person. That's true. They care about, tomorrow, whether they're going to be healthy enough to go to the factory to make, 500,000 more widgets, or whether their son is going to be able to go to school. And so these are the issues I need to bring it home to that level. And it's actually, you, blue-collar professional driver, are going to contract chronic obstructive pulmonary disease or lung cancer much more easily because your cab in your truck is filled with diesel fumes every day. That's the kind of level of message that we need to send effectively. Not about the planet so much, but that, here are some hard-hitting facts about how the environment is affecting you every day. So that is the level on which we need people to care. Not a more abstract, conceptual level of engagement. That is not going to work in a place which is still newly industrializing. I mean, that's a luxury which I think, liberal Western, I don't want to use liberal Western, we call them limousine liberals. I mean, this is one of the handicaps of being an environmentalist in Asia. It's still considered to be a limousine liberal Western expat issue to a large extent. I don't know if you heard about the dust storm. We had a dust storm here in March, which went a long way to getting the average outdoor worker or man on the street to care about this, because he went outside and he felt he was going to choke and maybe have a heart attack that day. And that was the first time that blue-collar workers, outdoor workers, street workers realized that, hey, this is not just an issue for these rich people who are office workers, who are working in multinational corporations, and that was actually a banner day for this movement. I didn't answer your question.
No, you did. You went
I didn't answer your question. That's a hard question.
Yeah.
That's a hard question.
For sure. In terms of, you mentioned sustainability, is Hong Kong sustainable?
Hong Kong is definitely not a sustainable place. I mean, this is a place which is undermining its vaunted efficiency every day because of environmental degradation. I mean, we're spending, there's more than $1 billion US in direct costs because of air pollution and because it's killing more than 1,000 people a year. I mean, the inefficiency of allowing that many people to die. I hate to say something in such inhumane terms, but that's actually what Hong Kong business people care about. So, and that's the kind of sustainability which counts in this town. Sustainability which can be tabulated in dollars and cents. So even in that regard, it isn't a sustainable city. Is it a place where I want to live? No, this is a place where it is unbearable because of the air pollution, the urban congestion that's actually led Hong Kong to drop in many Gallup polls And it's considered, I mean, this is a bargain with the devil. I mean, the reason that I live in Hong Kong is a long time ago, I decided that this is a place where, as a young person, you can make your way in the world, but it comes at a steep cost in terms of a degraded environment and a complete lack of investment in public cultural institutions, for example. So, but you know, at that time, it seemed to be a reasonable trade-off. Now that I have an 11-year-old son, now that I've decided that I want to go and enjoy life more, and that I don't want to work 18 hours a day. This is becoming an increasingly intolerable place to live, and I know that my opinion is shared by millions of Hong Kong people. I think that's the kind of thing you wanted me to say.
Yeah. Perfect.
That's true, though.
Yeah.
You haven't spent enough time here, but it's a very challenging place to think, I want to keep on living here. I mean, think about it. At an intersection in our central business district, every lunch hour, it's the level of congestion and crowding is similar to what you would get in Herald Square in front of Macy's on Christmas Eve every day, and that in soaring temperatures of almost 100 degrees. So, you know, you combine that with levels of air pollution, which, as I was saying, 3 times New York City's, the likelihood of me having a stroke on the street is not low. So.
Yeah, that kind of impact, I think people understand.
Yeah.
You know, like the environmental movement so far seems really difficult because we're talking about something out there. You know, save these animals that live on another continent.
Yeah.
Save the trees in another hemisphere.
Yeah.
And it hasn't really related.
You know what I want to do? I want to send you a lot of articles about China. I want to mention a couple of statistics about the degradation of the Chinese environment. That, according to the World Bank, air pollution costs China 3.8% of GDP, and that water pollution and shortages in China cost the economy 2.3%. When you add up those numbers, and those are only the direct costs on GDP of those forms of pollution, that pretty much nullifies the economic miracle of China. Let's not forget about occupational health hazards and costs as well. So I mean, the incredible so-called growth of China is really coming at a gigantic human cost. And if you tally this with a measure of green GDP instead of just dollar GDP, you would see that China is at the best coming out flat, if not coming out negative. China is dotted with tens and tens, if not hundreds, of cancer villages, where industrial production and certain factories which have polluted water sources, and also just the dumping, for example, with heavy metals and other industrial byproducts, have poisoned in large numbers. I mean, in epidemic proportions, which are impossible to ignore, the local populations of these villages or cities. So I'm going to send you this article so you can see. It's actually this level of toxicity which is finally given a wake-up call to the Chinese government. It's at that level. You know how you were just saying that when I'm walking on the street and I could literally drop dead from a stroke. That is the level of toxicity which the average Chinese migrant worker is experiencing today in any given one of these major sweatshop cities. I hate to call it a sweatshop city, but in any of these cities, which is a center of industrial production, it is such a danger on a daily basis that it's impossible to ignore. Now, Hong Kong, because it's in this middle zone between the so-called, protections and safeties, occupational protections, and environmental, relative environmental safety of a first world country, and the very visible environmental degradation of Hong Kong, the city has more difficulty in perceiving an actual problem. Like air pollution, people don't drop dead from the street from it in an obvious way. And in fact, that's kind of a weird, paradoxical, I don't want to call it an image problem, but it is an image problem for the issue as being perceived as a public health instead of an environmental issue. So we're between this, between China and in New York City. And that's one of the problems with perceiving that there's a problem.
Yeah. It seems like what's happening in Hong Kong and China is almost the future of the rest of the world if we keep going in this direction.
Well, I would think that what happened in China is something that happened in the UK and the US already, we know, in the period of industrialization. I think that what is happening in China is, in a way, it's going to take less time to rectify the situation, but because the globe is at such a tipping point, even though we're able to compress this cycle of industrialization and the creation of the recognition of this problem and the rectification of these environmental hazards, do we actually have enough time? So what's happening in China, I would say, is it's a cycle which has occurred elsewhere and which has been much more protracted in years before. But the question is it already too late? Because the magnification due to the scale of the population and of industrialization in China is so much greater. So China is going to be it will be the tipping point one way or the other. I think this is the inevitable conclusion, I'm sure, of all of your research. Actually, it's amazing. The kind of stuff that I'm telling you is, that kind of level of feedback from NGOs and even from the media, who is the Chinese government has permitted to conduct a lot of exposés of not private companies, state-owned enterprises and private companies polluting the environment. That is unprecedented. They are allowing NGOs and media to actually, at the grassroots level, correct and put into enforce a lot of these central government edicts, which are being undercut by local, provincial government corruption. So there is this corrective mechanism taking place. The problem with China is it's an incredibly decentralized government, system, and so there's not enough monitoring and enforcement. It's literally impossible to correct this problem through enforcement. It's really got to there's got to be a parallel track of education about the environment. That's what we're hoping to accomplish in Hong Kong. There's got to be a sense of inherent responsibility, that when people are trying to cheat the system, that this is morally wrong. This is a totally new kind of thinking in terms of the morality, the civic virtue of the average resident or citizen living in Greater China. This is a hard road. This is going to take that's why we're working on the youngest generations, because that's actually the greatest hope, to get young people to internalize a whole new set of values that they should never be, that there's a lot more cost to factor in than just the direct cost of paying a laborer to mine coal.
Now, what in terms of the hope and in terms of what's going right, what are you excited about, or what are you inspired by?
Well, what we've accomplished so far is we have gotten this issue of air pollution to be covered as a topic of important. Let me say that again. One of our major achievements, and where I'm very hopeful, is we've gotten this issue of air pollution covered by the international media as an issue of great business importance. And also we are creating this linkage between and recognition that air pollution is also a symptom of a broken political system. That is very promising because, of course, international media pressure is an important lever of influence on the government. So that's important. And then secondly, we have gotten a lot of business involved in environmentalism and reticent groups such as doctors. One of the industries that we've gotten mobilized, which really surprised me, was the medical profession in Hong Kong, who for the first time has been very outspoken. For the first time, they've actually gone to the Legislative Council and made speeches and stood up and said, look, this is insane that there are no medical professionals involved in setting air quality policy standards or alerts for the city. That's crazy. So when the medical profession, when we alerted them to the fact that, look, there's no one in the government actually who's a medical professional involved in setting air quality policy, you guys need to step in and fill this gap by becoming more vocal and outspoken. So I'm very proud of that, where to date the doctors have been among the most reticent, or even I would say timid, groups of people. We've even gotten the Bar Association involved. This is actually very promising because when you get, I mean, this bears testament to how widespread and unanimous the recognition of this problem is. We need to literally we need to build this very visible, broad consensus in society, and we've been laying the foundation for that. And it starts, the medical profession has a lot to do with that. And then finally, we're conducting a lot of education to primary and secondary school kids. I actually have great hope in that. I mean, it's really in this next generation of young people, I would say especially secondary school kids who are going to be entering university, that they can have a lot of influence. I mean, to some extent, I accept that the current government is hopeless. That they come from a generation which continues to this day to say things to me like this. Air pollution is not a public health problem. Look, Hong Kong has the longest lifespan in the world, therefore it's not a problem. I mean, you have some of the smartest, most educated people who, through willful ignorance or stupidity or just a total lack of responsibility, insist to this day that air pollution is not a health issue. And that, of course, makes me want to tear all my hair out. But what do? I put great stock in the next generation of leaders, whom we're reaching out to every day. So that I would say is going to be our next biggest achievement, and I'm looking forward to that. I can't believe the phone rang. The phone hasn't been ringing the whole time that you've been here. We've been really lucky.
Anything?
No. These are good questions. I'm really glad that you covered the issue of civic responsibility and individual responsibility. I mean, this is something that Chinese people, again, I don't want to generalize about Chinese people, but we do live in Hong Kong in an incredibly materialistic, selfish society, which is preoccupied with the next 5 minutes of me. And that's why we have to inculcate in this younger generation of people a sense of individual responsibility. And that's what we're doing through the issue of air pollution. Air pollution is just a way into the minds of a whole new generation of young people, I hope. Before a child is 18, their lungs are still growing. And, as many doctors say here, we're growing generations. Hong Kong's kids are growing up flat-footed compared to their counterparts all over the world living in cleaner air. So we have to, through that, by really hammering home the message that this is affecting you really every single day. Okay, first through that. And then secondly, and this is a real challenge, and I think that you found this talking to a lot of people. People really want to know, what can they directly do? And with air pollution, it isn't like climate change, really. It's not about using less electricity or buying an electric car. I mean, it's really about major political change, and which is going to result in tighter regulation of entire industries. So that is something that's very hard for people to wrap their head around. So we try to think of things that they can do on a daily basis. So we do things like we have engine idling squads. I mean, and something I do, for example, I go around handing out cards to Chinese truck drivers. We print those because it's very intimidating to stick your hand in, or it's turn the ignition off. I mean, stuff like that. Or with the EPD, the Environmental Protection Department, has something called the Smoky Vehicle Spotter Program, which is the only kind of program of its type in the world where you can become like a citizen vehicle spotter for vehicles which are emitting really, really black emissions. Stuff like that. But what people can really do is become champions and educators on this issue. So it's very important to go around and touch people personally by getting them really fired up and by giving them the basic facts about this. So one of the things that I do constantly, in which our campaign staff spends a lot of time doing, is going out and talking to schools and universities all the time. And that also extends beyond educational institutions. We also talk to major corporations. Many times, but the key challenge is answering that question when the individual asks, what can I actually do which is going to make an impact? And it's about voting in one way or another, and that's the difficulty of living in a political system as we do, where even if you do vote, let's say I can get the mass media to start caring about the green credentials of a political candidate. Even if that political candidate is voted into office, it is still not a slam dunk obvious thing that a green agenda is going to be legislated, because there's a lot of non-democratic elements in our governmental system. So I go back to the idea that we need to educate people at a level of the philosophical underpinnings of how they're going to live their life, and a sense of caring about the community and each other. And that's why it's really a generational change that we're trying to effect. And it's not going to be an expedient overnight change in policy.
It seems like it's the issues change very much from an environmental issue or from a health issue into almost like a moral issue. Like you can talk about thousands of people dying a year as being a business thing. Like, should it not hit people on a deeper level than that?
It is definitely a moral issue. It is definitely a moral issue. That's why I always contrast it to other big public health epidemics such as SARS. Because if the medical profession was involved in setting policy for air quality, there'd be no doubt. The government wouldn't question it for 5 seconds that this is an emergency which needs to be addressed immediately. And we also liken it to, we draw endless analogies to, for example, the government is spending $1 billion US on I think it's a sewage system. It's spending $500 million on a new incineration system. Now, why is clean air any different than clean water for a city? For some reason, again, because people don't drop dead on the ground, it isn't perceived as, with the same gravity. So there is that issue also of morality in terms of saving human lives. For some reason, air pollution is not considered in terms of saving human lives. It's always about, will business have to pay more dollars to cut down on emissions, instead of how many lives are we going to save? How much is this going to benefit public health? So we have to change the nature of the measuring sticks that are being used for this issue.
And what messages would you send to places like China when the whole world is looking to Hong Kong and New York and London and going, I want to be like that?
What messages would I send to China?
To China or the developing world?
That they have to invest in their future, since so much of their GDP is actually being gobbled up by this environmental devastation. That your average Chinese person is striving so hard to what they perceive to be a certain image and ideal of success and growth, that success cannot just be measured in terms of dollars, that part of that success is being, a lot of that your life, in terms of your life years, your health, that is being degraded and subtracted from your view of what success actually is. This is something that Chinese people don't factor in enough. One of the reasons that workers don't ask for shorter working hours, even though it obviously leads to a huge impairment of their health, is because they want to earn money so badly, they don't actually ask the government or their employer to enforce the safeguards that the government has actually announced, because they'd rather make the extra 4 hours of wages, of overtime, of underpaid overtime, than to get enough sleep, the kind of sleep which prevents their hand from getting stuck in a machine and to amputation. So these are the kinds of stories which I'm reading about all the time, that success can't just be measured in dollars. There's a lot more to life, and one of the direct impacts is health. And you should be factoring that into the overall picture, rather than looking at success in a silo of dollars. So that would be my main message.
And is that a message for China too?
No, this is a message for China. That's a message. Well, Hong Kong and China suffer from the same problem. It's just that Hong Kong, in terms of the attitude and philosophy of what constitutes success in the modern world, it's basically money at any price, without taking into account all the other costs which are not monetized, engaging one's success in life. So, Hong Kong is simply at a farther stage of industrial and technological development than China. But I actually see China and the Chinese government making bigger strides towards recognizing these problems and safeguarding society, natural resources, and workers from these problems than I do in Hong Kong. Again, because Hong Kong resides in this weird gray area between this clean, safe first world and the absolute hazardous world of like Shanxi province, where 4 out of the 10 most polluted cities in the world are located. Shanxi province is where coal is mined in China and has the greatest number of heavy industry in China. And there, you wake up every day and your face and your clothes are going to be covered in soot by the end of the day, after you've gone out to work or wherever you are, where the instinctive reaction is to cover your face and your mouth and your nose, because every single breath that you're taking is like 5 puffs on a cigarette. It's been estimated that the pollution in Shanxi province for young children is like allowing them to smoke 2 packs of cigarettes a day. So I mean, that is so that we need to take account of that.
Now, in terms of fighting, the environmental movement and fighting for something instead of against something, what kind of future could we have if we get this right?
I think that first, okay, on a very on a simple level, of course, we seek a sustainable environmental future. So one where we really have a high level of energy efficiency. But what I hope for also in this whole, this whole conversation we've been having is clearly that I think that through this philosophy of sustainability and inculcating this value in society at large, that we can foster a greater sense of community, and we can fight against other very pernicious influences in society which are brought on by technology. Let's talk about the information age and the atomization of the individual, the increasing solitary, isolated activity of individuals who are interconnected primarily through technology. Maybe environmentalism, maybe the philosophy of sustainability can actually create a kind of a web of goodwill and sense of responsibility and engagement among individuals that has actually been eroded with technology and the onset of all kinds of, like, the division of labor that's brought on by information technology. I hate to bring in information technology, but that's another very dangerous phenomenon in modern society, which is causing people to care about each other less. So I hope that, again, using the environment as a weather vane issue, which is of universal importance to everyone, to also create more cohesiveness in society and a greater sense of responsibility.
So they can be the galvanizing issue to bring people back together.
Yeah, that's what I'm hoping, and I think that without that, I mean, the problem is, nowadays society is not, the original unit of society at the beginning, the polis or towns or villages were really considered, they were treated, it was more like a family, like an extended family unit. We have completely lost touch with this paradigm of community living where the sense of protecting the group has been subordinated to the ambition of the selfish individual, and and that's obviously resulted in a failure in basically a lot of cheating of the system by the individual, people just trying to take advantage for their own monetary gain of the system without any regard to the long-term impacts of their behavior, and without any correcting influences. That phenomenon, that kind of behavior is going to become more pronounced and more extreme with time when you take into account as well the influence of information technology on our behavior. That and capitalism. I could get into a huge rant about capitalism, the effect of information technology. One of the things I've been planning to do for a long time is actually write a book. I actually wrote all these things out that I wanted to write, but I haven't had time.
Yeah.
But
one thing we talk about in the next film is how we can't really, I'm sure I've got it.
It's 10:40. I got my eye on the clock. Just tell me when you should stop. Well, Lisa's going to walk in through the door, and then you should stop.
Okay.
Because Lisa told her to come here.
One of the things we're talking about in the movie is how we can't really battle these environmental crises that are threatening humanity.
That's Lisa.
Yeah, we can't battle that without redefining our economic system. We can't have an economic system based on perpetual growth and the destruction of the world we depend on for survival.
Right. Absolutely. No, capitalism is definitely is the root problem systemically, especially public companies which owe shareholders short-term profits are obviously going to subordinate long-term growth and sustainability for grabbing the lowest hanging fruit, because governments don't force the economic activities, negative externalities to be internalized in the price structure. Of course, there's going to be a lot of this kind of ravaging of the environment. I mean, I think that capitalism is definitely the root problem, because as long as pricing does not reflect the negative impacts to the environment of an economic activity, too much of that activity is going to take place, which is going to cause a lot of short-term damage and destruction to the environment. So that kind of failure to internalize these problems in pricing, combined with capitalism and the imperative of short-term profitability, is obviously going to lead to continuing environmental crisis. So I think that capitalism is it's definitely that and consumerism are the main culprits systemically.
Yeah.
Oh, I hope that was better.
That was better.
That was better. That was simpler. I had problems talking like a normal person.
No, I really appreciate it. Thank you so much.
Okay, good. I'm glad we treated that capitalism issue.
Yeah, no, that's huge, and
that's huge. You should. I mean, I hope you get more, commentators to mention that.
I'm finding trouble with is what the solution is. Like, how do we make it an economy that's not built on perpetual growth and short-term gain? That's the the undoing of America.
Yeah, no, I've been thinking about that. I've been actually thinking that the nation state. Okay, so I don't know. I've got to think about that. I don't know. I'm the kind of person who actually actively thinks about that quite a lot. So I mean, I want to think about that. But I mean, first, the nation state is definitely unable to keep a check on these kinds of activities, because look at multinational corporations. I mean, they're the ones actually in China raping the environment.
Yeah.
To a large extent. I mean, I don't want to. Well, they are raping the environment with the condonement of the Chinese government, who has failed to put any officers on watch. Okay, I mean, I think that that's how I describe what's happening to the Chinese environment. But what you have, we can only rely on supranational mechanisms, right? We have seen the huge failure of Copenhagen. That was not unforeseen, because I mean, what do you have if you don't have the power of sovereign nations actually who are obligated to come to a solution? So that failed. So you have to think about the only thing that can possibly work within the given system is supranational economic mechanisms with a profit motive. That's as long as capitalism continues to be the dominant system of economic activity and creation, right? So now, failing that, I haven't gotten beyond that.
Yeah. And what is a supernatural?
Supranational.
National.
No, you could take, one of the things I was talking about, with some friends that, go to WEF all the time, to WEF all the time, is it can be like a social media platform. It should be something like a Google, can have a moderating effect, because it is actually something with tentacles inside so many different societies, which transcends these conventional boundaries of the nation state. The nation state, the lack of coordination between nation states is a fatal flaw in trying to remedy, to create a political solution. Okay, so what can work is supranational economic or financial entities or businesses, such as a Google or a Wikipedia, or I don't know, or a Facebook. I think Facebook actually can have a gigantic moderating effect, actually. I mean, you look at what are the new entities which are aggregating huge numbers of people who have united psychographic interests. It's going to be entities and organizations such as those.
Yeah. Shouldn't that be something like the UN or the WTO? Aren't these?
Well, no, because nation states, because the unit there is really the nation state. The nation state, because of their political systems, are essentially capitalistic, democratic in many cases, and so long as capitalism is the main driving force, behind business decision making, and so long as business decision making results in constituency driven democracy of this type that we have in the United States, you're going to end up with really short term bad political decisions like the kind we have in the United States. Okay. So as long as those systems are in place, I have no hope that these organizations which are built on the nation state paradigm, those are not going to work. We need to overhaul the economic systems at their root in order to make any progress. I mean, probably. And in the meantime, we can only hope to rely on these supranational economic entities such as a Facebook. Actually, that sounds like crazy, but I actually don't think it's crazy. I mean, Facebook as a nation, I mean, think about, 500 million people. I mean, that's why it was such a huge disappointment when Facebook was outed for using coal-fired electricity for its servers. I don't know how much you've been following that, but that's something I was tweeting and posting a lot about, because Facebook is in a place to exercise moral authority. Think about it. If Facebook actually decided to, it has the role potentially of educating all of its membership with small messages, whatever. It could be like little banner ads inside the Facebook interface. It doesn't really matter what it is. It could be through the subsidy of NGOs who are promoting this message about energy efficiency or individual responsibility. These are the kinds of messages which, if transmitted through these media which have such huge reach, these can affect generations of young people who in turn can maybe can second guess and counter these these political systems which have been considered to be the only viable political and economic systems in these countries for hundreds of years. So I mean that's like a major sweeping statement, and who knows? But I mean, to me, that's one of the only hopes that we have. So I mean, here we go back to the concept of individual responsibility. It'd be amazing if Mark Zuckerberg was personally motivated enough to and I think Google is, for example. They've made a lot of green energy investments, and this is like one of the biggest CSR initiatives that they have is to invest in green energy research. I mean, that can shape generations of young people's mindsets, and that is very valuable.
Yeah, these companies need to be leaders.
Yeah, I mean, for example, they could charge higher advertising rates, or they could make it more transparent. They could do carbon audits. They could do efficiency audits. They could do air pollution audits. There's just so many things that they can do. Yet all they want to have is a completely unfettered, transparent, economically efficient system. But that's the problem. Our idea of what constitutes economic efficiency is clearly flawed. This is something that has been validated time and time again through the lens of environmental degradation. So we need to factor in those costs, and then it can really be economically efficient. And it would be great if these mechanisms could assist in actually factoring in those costs accurately.
Yeah, it seems like if there were any foresight or looking to the future, people would see that we're impoverishing future generations and we're destroying our future economic growth by destroying the environment.
Yeah. I'm really looking for a new generation of people, though. I mean, I really think that, the people who are in power today, they just don't have the same mindset. I mean, I think that it's people like us, who are younger. I mean, I think that this is actually, you're much younger than I am, but I mean, I think that it's incumbent on us actually to continue to spearhead this message especially among among the leaders of tomorrow. That's a lot of what we're doing.